Thank you very much, Fernando. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. Today, we will present the third issue of the residential segment of the Grid Parity Monitor, and we will present the results for European countries and American countries, Latin American and California. Fernando, could you please give us the option to pass the slides? I think there was a connection problem. Yeah, thank you. Okay, basically, Creara and Eclareon have just merged their business to form Creara Energy Experts. So the previous GPM issues which were published by Eclareon are now under the name of Creara Energy Experts. Well, as you might all know, grid parity is the moment when grid electricity price from the grid is more expensive than the PV electricity cost generated by the PV system. In our analysis, what we do is we assume that 100% of the energy generated by the PV system is automatically consumed by the prosumer. Another option is to have a net metering or net billing system that in practice is a means of storing the excess PV electricity, and therefore in many cases it could result in 100% of self-consumption ratio. However, if the market we are analyzing does not have any net metering or equivalent mechanism that allows the consumer to store its excess generation, then this assumption does not hold. The PV Grid Parity Monitor is an analysis that we have been publishing for several years. Its objective is to analyze the grid parity proximity in the most interesting countries in several segments. This is the third issue of the residential consumer analysis, but we have also analyzed the commercial segment and the utility scale segment. It is based on real updated data. We ask for quotations from local installers, and the analysis is updated periodically to assess how grid parity proximity evolves. The PV Grid Parity Monitor is sponsored by renowned international companies such as SunEdison and Ingeteam. Also, we are supported by relevant partners such as the European Copper Institute, Biomodel Solar, SunPower, and PV associations such as ACIRA, ANEF, UNEF, the Australian PV Institute, the German and French Office for Renewable Energies, and BPVA. We should all bear in mind that what the LCOE metric does is translate the cost flows of the PV system in a unit that allows us to compare with the electricity prices we pay to the utility. These electricity prices are the variable prices, the prices we pay for each kilowatt hour that we consume from the utility grid. And generally, the main difference between an investment in a PV system and an alternative technology is that we incur in a relatively large investment cost, and throughout the life of the system, we have relatively smaller operating expenditures. So what the LCOE metric does is discount the cost incurred throughout the life of the system and express it per unit of kilowatt hour generated by the PV system. However, the LCOE metric is fixed and theoretical. That is, as soon as we calculate the LCOE for a given PV system in a given point in time, this parameter remains fixed throughout the 20, 25, or 30 years that the PV system generates electricity. However, when we compare the LCOE with the cost of the electricity from the grid, we should bear in mind that it is estimated that in the future, of course, the electricity price that we pay to the utility will probably increase. So this should be accounted for when analyzing the results we are presenting here. Now my colleague Rocio will present the results for each of the countries presented today. Thank you.
Hello everyone, as my colleague just said, I'm going to show you the results we obtained with this analysis, which includes data as of first semester of 2014. As you can see in this slide, Mexico is a great example for a good combination between grid parity and an effective regulation that fosters PV self-consumption. It actually generates a great opportunity for consumers to invest in PV. Also, Australia, Italy, and Germany have reached full grid parity, but actually the regulatory support enables the consumer to compensate the excess electricity, but in this case at a lower rate than with a net metering scheme in which you compensate kilowatt hour per kilowatt hour. Another example worth mentioning is Spain, because as you can see it's well positioned in grid parity, but the regulatory support that we have is really bad, so it does not foster a PV self-consumption market. Going more in detail, you can see in this slide Brazil's results, and as you can see, PV electricity is still far from being competitive against electricity prices, mainly because of the high installation price that they have on the country, and also because the electricity tariffs have recently been decreased. Although Brazil in 2013 implemented a new regulation, Brazil since 2013 there has been a net metering regulation for renewable energies, which on the first sight seems like an excellent instrument to foster the self-consumption market. In Chile, as you can see, in the northern part of Chile has already reached full grid parity, mainly because of the high irradiation levels that this part of the country presents. But in other locations, such as Santiago, only partial grid parity has been reached from an economical point of view. In 2012, a net billing regulation was approved, but until last September, its technical note wasn't published. So we cannot make any conclusions yet about how this regulation is going to foster the market. But on a first evaluation, we can see that it seems like a proper incentive to generate a PV self-consumption market. And France has very low electricity prices, and this prevents the country from reaching a grid parity. Also because the feed-in tariff scheme that they have in the country does not foster self-consumption, but it's worth mentioning that the PV systems that we are studying in this case are the VAPV, although the normal systems that they have in France are VAPV. It actually does exist in some cases, such as in Marseille, where if you take advantage of the most competitive quotation of the LCOE, it's actually lower than the peak tariff. So as a consumer could implement PV, but the average is that it's not feasible for the consumer. Germany, which is the next one, hasn't shown many changes since last year's Grid Parity Monitor, but as you can see, for both Berlin and Munich, full grid parity has been reached. Also, they have a very good self-consumption incentive, which is a feed-in tariff scheme, but it actually incentivizes it at a lower rate than the electricity prices. In the case of Italy, full grid parity has been reached for all the countries on all the standard tariffs, and as you may see, there are 4 different tariffs which depend on the consumption of the consumer. Even for the lower tariff, grid parity has been reached. Also, they have a net metering mechanism, which is called the Scambio sul Posto, which fosters on a good way the self-consumption, but in the case of Germany, at a lower rate than the grid electricity prices. As we said before, for DAC consumers, which are the residential consumers that have high electricity consumption, the PV self-consumption is an excellent opportunity from an economical point of view, although for the average electricity consumers, PV doesn't seem like a competitive alternative. Also, the regulation from Mexico fosters in a good way the PV market, as they have a net metering scheme, but it's worth mentioning that at the end of 2003, Mexico's government introduced an energy reform which will lead to an extensive changes in legislation, and the expectation of these changes is that they will have a strong impact in the development of the PV market. In the case of Spain, grid parity has been reached, but it's actually really necessary the publication of a good regulation that allows consumers to feed their excess generation into the grid. Because of this lack of regulatory support, PV prices have been facing some changes, and some installers have introduced different systems in their PV systems. They have put some inverters that control the power you fed into the grid, and some of them have just decided to shift their core business to other products. Also, the electricity rates in Spain have been facing some changes as the fixed component has increased, but actually the variable component, which is the one we study, has been reduced, as you can see in the slide. In UK, even if the LCOE has been experienced a considerable decrease in past years, PV technologies is still far from being competitive, mainly because grid electricity prices haven't increased as much as in other countries. Although the regulatory support fosters the self-consumption market in a good way with a FIT SIM, by which this FIT SIM has 2 different rates. They receive one for the electricity, the PV electricity they produce, and also a bonus for the excess electricity they fed into the grid. In the case of the United States, we have studied California, and the PV LCOE of the most competitive quotations, as you can see in the different slides, is already lower than the high peak tariff. But it's worth mentioning that in California, third-party ownership mechanisms such as leasing or loan are helping the development of this PV market. The net metering system of California has been implemented for a long time now and could be used as a good example of how to promote a PV self-consumption market in a cost-effective way. According to all these results, as you can see, all countries are evolving towards grid parity, and as long as the market evolves, the residential consumer will perceive lower risk for investing in PV. Full grid parity has been reached in several countries, as I told you before, such as Chile, Germany, Italy, and Mexico, and also others that we didn't include in these slides, in this presentation, that are Australia and Japan, which you can find them in the document, and there is the study in further detail. Even if grid parity has been reached, as we said before, the regulatory support is really important to foster the self-consumption market. So as in the case of Spain really illustrates this rule, that we have to see on future issues of the GPM what happens in the future with countries that currently are in incentive self-consumption. Well, now I'm going to pass the phone to my colleague, who's going to explain to you the next issues of the GPM.
Thank you, Rocio. Good afternoon to everybody. This is Davide Sabatino. Thank you for participating in this session of GPM webinar. Well, on the table that you can see on the slides, we have planned several issues for this year. And, well, on March, we will publish the special edition dedicated to Chile. We will analyze the three segments: residential, commercial, and utility scale segments. The same analysis we will do for Mexico, and we will publish it on April. And then we will update the commercial issue on May and the utility scale issue on July. So if you are interested in supporting GPM reports, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much for participating. Goodbye.